Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our event today. We are excited to look at the connected and automated vehicle ecosystem in Canada. And my name is Tara Andringa, and I'm the Executive Director of PAVE, which is Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. For those of you who are not familiar with PAVE, just a real quick overview. We launched in the United States in 2019. And the idea was we saw a lot of progress being made in the automated vehicle industry, but also noted that consumer sentiment was not following along, that people largely were confused, mistrustful, and had a lot of bad information about AVs. So we started a 501c3 nonprofit that is solely educational. Our mission is to raise the level of public understanding and acceptance by the public. Earlier this year, we launched PAVE Canada with the support of a very generous grant from Transport Canada. And we launched in January, and then our first activity was to do a public survey of the Canadian public, looking at what consumers thought and knew about autonomous vehicles. And we teamed with both JD Power and MIT to do that survey. And then after we got those results, we launched into a education campaign trying to address where we saw gaps in knowledge. After that long explanation, we are going to do two things today. One is Lisa Boer, who is from JD Power, is going to give you an overview of the survey of Canadian attitudes of AVs and our findings. And then we are going to turn to our panelists to have a discussion about the state of the AV ecosystem in Canada. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to hearing more about the survey results.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to share my screen real quickly. I have some slides that I would like to share with everyone today. So real quickly, while I am giving this top line, I want to state a little more about the collaboration that JD Power has, both with PAVE and the MIT AVT Consortium. You know, each of these organizations has done extensive research independently of one another, and the ability for us to collaborate is so great because we are able to bring together both the voice of the customer from the JD Power side, of course, the academic experts at MIT, and then that very critical element of consumer education with PAVE's support. And so today I am going to share with you some of the results from the study that was conducted in Canada. We conducted the same identical survey in the US. So there is a little sprinkling of some US and Canadian data for comparison. But the methodologies for both markets are identical. And we've been conducting the US Mobility Confidence Index study for a few years now. We were very excited to expand the study to Canada with the support of Transport Canada and one of their grants, and obviously with PAVE Canada's support as well. So the metric itself is JD Power loves a good index. And so it's critical for us in the industry to ensure that we have these comprehensive measurements. And the MCI index is truly a measurement of multiple aspects of consumer readiness for the AV technology. And so by doing so, we have ensured that we're looking at different applications of the technology. Everything from riding in one, transporting goods, the use of AV technology in public transport, how consumers feel about sharing the road with AVs, and then of course the applications for those who are unable or unwilling to drive. And then that last element is the likelihood that consumers would like to purchase or lease an AV as a personal vehicle for themselves. So the MCI index really considers each of these applications, and it's interesting to see where consumers, where their preferences are and their outlook. So when we look at this next slide is the overall the Mobility Confidence Index for each of those 6 attributes. And in Canada, the overall index, and this is measured on a 100-point scale, So the overall index in Canada is 37. And so we consider that to be a very low level of consumer readiness. And when we look at each of these attributes, and as I spoke about, whether consumers are comfortable riding in an AV, utilizing it for transportation of goods, sharing the road, utilizing public transportation, and then those applications should you be unable or unwilling to drive. We can see that consumers are citing higher levels of comfort with non-personal use. So things such as the transportation of goods, and utilizing the technology for those who are unable or unwilling to drive. And so one of the things, and we're seeing this fairly consistently in both markets, and it's interesting to see that consumers are positive about the technology. However, it's that application of it's great, but I'm not quite ready there. It's great for maybe some other applications that aren't involving me right now, but I definitely see the value. When we look at those consumers who have said that they are early adopters of new technology, and when we say new technology, it means any technology. It's not just transportation technology. We definitely see higher levels of consumer readiness for consumers who are early adopters of technology across the board. And so that is very positive for us to consider as we look at this ecosystem as a whole. And not surprisingly, we see that younger consumers are reporting higher levels of comfort across all of these transportation modalities. So again, these are not hugely, these are not high levels of comfort, but they're definitely higher. And so it shows that younger consumers are definitely expressing some higher levels of readiness for the technology itself. So when we look at the industry, we understand that customer's experience truly starts today, and the lower levels of vehicle automation that are on current vehicles in the marketplace now, it's very important for us throughout the industry to understand what that customer's experience looks like. And so I'd like to take just a few minutes of our time today to talk about the consumer experience with advanced driving assistance systems. So we refer to those as ADAS features. And so these introductions that consumers are having with lower levels of automated technologies are very important because they're setting the tone for how consumers are embracing technology and what their experiences are like. And all of that starts with knowing if consumers are actually using the features themselves. And so in the survey, we asked consumers, we have 6 ADAS features: blind spot warning, forward collision warning, lane maintenance systems, automatic emergency braking, active driving assistance, and adaptive cruise control. And we try to we'd like to know, how frequently do you use these features on your vehicle? And so we see that 1/4, 25% of consumers are using active driving assistance on a regular basis. And active driving assistance in the industry is currently the highest level of automation that's readily available in consumers' vehicles. So this is kind of that benchmark. And with the exception of blind spot warning, we're seeing that ADAS feature usage every time a vehicle is driven is less than 50%. So there is this opportunity for us to educate owners on the value of these safety technologies. And then, of course, there's the fact that we know from other research that repeated usage of these ADAS features is associated with higher levels of comfort with automation. So it starts now, and these are the building blocks. On the other side of this slide, I have, for those same 6 features, the percentage of owners who are stating that they have either never tried to use these features or they tried using them and they turned them off. And so these are lost opportunities. And again, these are, in our other data that we look at new vehicle owners after 90 days of ownership, getting a customer to start using something after they've had their vehicle for a long period of time becomes more of a challenge. So ensuring that education is provided at that beginning of the ownership period is a very critical part for ADAS acceptance and usage. When we look at, we want to understand how consumers are learning how to operate these ADAS features on their current vehicles. And we see that there are the majority of the top sources are these very traditional methods: an owner's manual, the dealer's explanation, family and friends. And then we do have, online searches, or that's like the top fourth or fifth item. And so when we can see that these very traditional methods, they're not able to do it on their own. They're missing the mark alone, and we cannot rely on the dealer to educate consumers on all of these higher levels of technology. They play a very critical role, and that cannot be overlooked. But we need to ensure that the education opportunities expand. And I'll talk a little bit more later about some non-traditional or different varieties that consumers are open to. We can see here that when we look at preferred sources of information that consumers would like to use, they are citing online videos and some more interactive learning methods. So it's very important that we realize that there is this desire for some variation, and that we need to continue both traditional and some alternatives as well. The one thing I would like to cite is there is this percentage of consumers who, about 20%, who are stating that they learned by doing, or it was self-taught. And this is an area that we like to keep our eye on at JD Power, because it is concerning when you have consumers who are relying on teaching themselves. And as we continue to evolve and have higher levels of automation, we really need to be careful, because these consumers may present some risk. And so that needs to be noted as well. Before we start talking about consumer AV knowledge itself, I just wanted to make a point to talk about the role that trust plays in this ecosystem. And we are all part of the ecosystem, and each stakeholder plays a very critical role in building consumer trust. And this is something that is built over time, and ensuring that consumers understand and find value in these current ADAS features really provides a foundation for consumer AV trust, for the acceptance and the progression of moving consumers into this level of transportation. The MCI study asked a series of questions in order to gauge consumers' knowledge regarding AVs. And one of those questions is asking them, how much do you know about fully automated self-driving vehicles? And it's interesting to see that the majority of respondents are saying that they know just some about fully automated self-driving vehicles. And so this data is very consistent across both the Canadian and the US market. We are seeing consumers, this is their self-reported level of knowledge regarding the technology. So then we ask a few more specific questions. And one of those is asking the consumers to select a definition or a phrase that most closely defines what a fully automated self-driving vehicle is. And they are given 7 items to pick from, ranging from the vehicle performs all of the driving tasks in all situations to the driver performs all of the driving tasks. And we see that when we say that 33% of consumers are correctly defining what a fully automated self-driving vehicle is, they are saying that the systems would perform all of the driving tasks in all of the situations, or that the system can perform the driving tasks in some situations, but that the driver would not need to take control at any time. So that being said, the majority of consumers are classifying the driver assist technologies that are available today as being fully automated self-driving vehicles. So there is this recognition, there is a gap in perceived and actual knowledge that I think is critical for us as industry stakeholders to be mindful of. And so in the US market, we've been doing this for a few years, and this data has been very consistent. And so we're seeing that these deficiencies in consumer understanding are persistent. We ask for those, when we look at this same question and compare those who state that they know a great deal about AVs versus those who state that they know nothing at all about AVs, it's fascinating to see that those who know a great deal about AVs tend to actually get it wrong more than those who state that they know nothing at all about it. So we see this knowledge, there's this knowledge mismatch, and the concern that we have is that this consumer overconfidence, right, can present some additional risk. And so again, there's that need to bridge this gap with some comprehensive educational efforts. The one thing we also try to look at is to see if those consumers who currently have active driving assistance on their current vehicle, if that in itself impacts their ability to accurately define what a fully automated self-driving vehicle is. And it's interesting to see that accuracy of knowledge is virtually identical for those who have active driving assistance. So we're seeing that the usage of ADAS features is increasing comfort with automation, but that doesn't necessarily aid the accuracy of AV understanding. So we ask consumers to tell us a bit about what they see the advantages and disadvantages are for the technology. And the graphic that I'm showing you right now are the top 5 advantages and the top 5 disadvantages that consumers selected. And there is no question that consumers see value in the technology as they see advantages for fewer intoxicated drivers, the ability to transport those who are unable or unwilling to drive, the ability to do other things while in transit, and then of course those safety items of fewer crashes and then less stress for consumers. So it's interesting that these 5 advantages are ranked in the same order for both Canada and the US. When we look at the top disadvantages that consumers see, we see that technology failures and errors and the possibility of vehicles being hacked, and of course, liability and the responsibility should an accident occur. Those are the top items that are most concerning to consumers in Canada. Giving up control and pedestrian and cyclist safety also round out those top 5 items. What is fascinating is that while these same 5 items are seen in both Canada and the US as being disadvantages, the ranking changes a bit between the markets. And we see in America, the consumers are a little more concerned with giving up control, where Canadians are more concerned with the possibility of being hacked. When we look at this concern about the possibility of being hacked, we see that this is definitely consumers are expressing the desire to have more information regarding what is being done to prevent the possibility of hacking. And as we look at this concern, this is something that we're seeing across all generations. So no one consumer is citing this concern more or less than another, as opposed to some of the other concerns that consumers are stating, where they are requesting additional information to know how AVs are meeting government standards. This is something that we're seeing more concerning to older consumers. So I realize I'm about 20 minutes. I want to quickly just talk about the manner in which consumers want to learn about lower levels of automation. And so to my mention earlier, where consumers are expressing this desire to learn in some in-person and including in-vehicle examples, utilizing that touch screen, having more interactive opportunities. And so this slide truly illustrates that opportunity for some diverse and comprehensive AV education. And again, the goal is to close that gap between the actual and perceived AV knowledge. And these express desires for more in-person and interactive learning methods is something that we are seeing in both Canada and the US. And then I just want to leave on this note that when we ask consumers who should provide this training, consumers are citing that this is a shared responsibility. Some consumers even go as far by saying all of the above. And so it's definitely, this is not a one size fits all. We see that driving schools and formal driving education, those are items that are also being cited by consumers. And so we know that while the dealer plays a very critical role, there's only so much they can do in a short amount of time. So it's very critical that we keep in mind that when it comes to education, this is truly a collaboration, and that each of these stakeholders plays a very integral role in ensuring, that consumers are safely moving into this modern mobility movement. So I'm going to stop talking now because I realize I have been talking longer than you want me to, Tara, but I get excited about this stuff. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop sharing and kind of turn it over in case you want to talk. I see there's chat.
Yeah, that's super. Always interesting as usual, Lisa. One question actually before we turn over to our panel of experts, kind of pivoting into that. When we look at all the data you just shared, what can industry do? We're going to talk to some people in the cab industry in Canada. What are the things that industry can do to really help bridge these gaps?
So one of the things that we talk about is the lack of standardized terminology and language that we're using throughout the industry. Some of the terminology and phrasing that we use in the industry as a whole, some of these technical terms, these are not translating into consumer-friendly phrasing and terminology. So part of ensuring that consumer expectations are clear and that they understand the capabilities of the technology is using consumer-friendly language. And that's something that it has to be embraced by all stakeholders, right? And whether you're marketing or you're trying to put a product on the market, or you're at the dealer level, using similar language is very important.
Absolutely, letting consumers compare apples to apples so they know what's on their vehicle. And then I do want to say PAVE joined JD Power and several other organizations, Consumer Reports, SAE, National Safety Council, I'm sure I'm forgetting someone, in an effort called Clearing the Confusion, working to address exactly that. Well, thank you, Lisa, so much for joining us today. Wonderful to see you as always, and super interesting presentation.
Thank you so much for having me, and always a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I'll welcome the rest of the panelists to join us so we can move to part 2 of this conversation. Great, thank you all so much. And I want to introduce our amazing panelists today. We have Barry Kirk, who's the Executive Director of Cavco, Raghvendra Sadev, who is the co-founder and CEO of Newport Robotics, Clinton D'Souza, who is a Senior Vice President at Marsh, and Sam Loesch, who is the Head of Public Policy and Public Affairs at Wabi. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And as I said at the start, we are excited to just have a conversation about the state of the Canadian AV ecosystem, both where it is now, where it's going, what the potential is for the future, and really excited to have these amazing panelists join us. So thank you all. And we'll jump right in. Barry, I'm actually going to start with you. Can you just give us a really broad overview of sort of the main segments of the cab ecosystem in Canada and sort of what it looks like today?
Indeed, there are 3 main segments to the cab industry. One is passenger transportation, which goes all the way from small minibuses to regular cars to larger transit vehicles. Second one is freight, both large 18-wheelers for intercity, middle mile between, say, warehouse and the store, and even small vehicles, robots for last mile. And the third one is service vehicles, which will eventually roam our streets unattended to do things like snow plowing and garbage collection.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Sam, next wanted to ask you, so that's sort of where we are now. When you look forward the next decade, the next 2 decades, where do you see the main opportunities for growth here in the CAV ecosystem?
Yeah, no, great question. So just to kind of recap for folks, Sam Lesh from Wabi. Wabi is the only Canadian-based level 4 Class 8 trucking developer. So we are focused on long haul, like Barry said, type operations, looking hundreds of kilometers, spanning longer distances, in an area where both in Canada and the US, you have existing problems in both the economics of the industry, but then also in the human beings who are driving in it, right? Canada has about half of the driver shortage that exists in the US, but if you were to model that out in terms of percentage of population and freight that's moved, that is a ton of people. It's somewhere between 20 to 24,000, depending on who you're looking at, of drivers that are currently short right now. That is only going to get worse as the driver age continues to expand upwards. People are going to retire out of the industry, and you still have the same freight volumes, if not higher freight volumes, that are going to need to be moved longer distances. There are definitely some challenges on the technical side of Canada, especially doing long haul type freight. You have a lot of mountainous and uneven terrain in certain parts of the country. You also have the everyone's favorite topic, the weather. But we see it as a huge opportunity to help kind of bring the benefits of Wabi and self-driving onto the freight movement ecosystem for an enormous country with very large, long stretches of highway that need to be conquered, and able to do so in a safer manner, more fuel efficient, and then also for the business side, getting loads to your customers with greater precision, so more accurately in terms of pickup and drop off time, without any of the human-based limitations that would take to say go from the West Coast even to Ontario or somewhere else farther east.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. And then kind of on that note, Brad Thunder, where do you see as the areas of expansion for the CAV ecosystem in Canada, kind of in terms of how it fits into the global CAV ecosystem?
Hi, I'm Raghwinder, and we are Canada's first autonomous level 4 autonomous trucking company. So just to correct that one, some of the areas that I see for expansion for autonomous driving for CAV ecosystems, it's going to start with trucks, because passenger vehicles autonomy is a much harder problem than solving trucks, which is mostly on highways and known predetermined routes, as opposed to when you're solving the AI problem for passenger vehicles, it's much harder. And some of the other opportunities for expansion include there are multiple stakeholders involved in the CAV ecosystems, like telematics, data providers, and all the ingredients that go into building the AI technology. So from a global perspective, it depends which countries are more favorable for regulation. So that will depend on where we go for expanding. And some of the other opportunities that I see in the CAV ecosystem are like deploying solutions that are realistic and that can make money quicker, as opposed to making like claims that we will solve this by a particular year and not having done that. Some other opportunities are in freight optimization, improvement to efficiencies, reducing GHG emissions, using different components that are linked to the deployment of AVs.
Great. Yeah. And then Clinton, so we're talking a lot about the kind of technical side of the technology. When you contrast that, what are the main marketing challenges for companies in this space?
Yeah, I think the main marketing challenges is, once again, Clinton Susan from Marsh. We're a global insurance broker, risk management, work with a number of companies and have a number of trading partners, insurance partners as well. But the main challenge is more in terms of education, especially with companies that are in this space, whether you're a technology company or even a OEM, a car manufacturer, is to educate not only their insurance provider about some of the risk and how to manage those risks, and have a framework that can give that information to that insurance provider in a very concise and very informative way. That's one of the main challenges that we're seeing in this space globally, in terms from the insurance perspective, is to how to manage it, how to provide education, and how to educate the insurance industry in that. sense.
It's super helpful. And then Barry, building on that exactly, what are the best ways to educate consumers?
I think a continuation of what we are all doing and what PAVE is doing, what I'm doing. We do a lot of our business. Just to introduce Cavco, we spend, our clients are really people who come to us to look for advice on how they can move into the CAV era. And part of that is education. I also do quite a bit of public speaking, as you do, Tara, talking to people, the general public of all ages, about what's coming down the pike. And what I really love when we get back into live public speaking is the amount of interest. I'm giving one in a few days to a seniors group in British Columbia. And there is a lot of interest, a real thirst to know more. So it's public speaking, consulting, articles in magazines and newspapers, all the traditional ways, but we need to do, all of us, a lot more of that.
Absolutely, for sure. Sam, so obviously we've made a huge amount of progress in this technology, but we still aren't, if we ever will be, at level 5. What are the biggest technical challenges we still need to overcome that the industry is still grappling with?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think it's multiple, and I think it depends on kind of what developer or company you're talking to, right? Each company's individual stack is going to have kind of unique strengths, but then also challenges. And that's kind of where Wabi is kind of taking a little bit of a new, we'd like to think of it as a 2.0 approach to, actually developing the system from the ground up. The current general approach, whether it's on PASCAR or trucking, both in the US and Canada, kind of relies on a lot of behind the scenes development, a little bit of simulation and track testing, and then a lot of on-road, truck or car miles in order to both kind of do V&V, validate your actual system performance, but then also build up your next generation of system, right? You run a lot of both data collection miles on the roads, as well as kind of to test out your system, and you wait to kind of test the system in that way, right? Run across a scenario that you otherwise aren't going to see. A deer crossing the road, someone approaching your lane at an awkward angle, maybe not respecting the normal kind of ins and outs of the unspoken kind of rules of the road. And the problem is that those things happen very infrequently, but when they do happen, they are very dangerous. So what Wabi has done is try to flip some of that development cycle on its head, focusing on our own internal proprietary simulation technology to allow our simulator and our actual self-driving stack to fight and basically work against each other to try to both conquer those challenging situations that we know about, but then also to come up with new situations that are going to be very infrequent and very unlikely to see on the road, but when they do happen, will be very dangerous. The other key component that we're really focused on is making sure that artificial intelligence is baked into both halves of that equation, so that we aren't as focused on needing to hand engineer and change any sort of problems that actually come up. The other part, the unspoken part in some ways of the challenges of a lot of companies' current approaches is the cost side too, right? Running a fleet of an enormous number of test vehicles is incredibly expensive. The more LiDAR and radar and high definition cameras you strap onto everything, the more cost that you're incurring per vehicle. And so it's just a very challenging way to be able to develop the system. So we see our system as being able to do that in a more cost efficient manner, and as well as in a safer manner. So I think you've seen the challenges across the ecosystem the last, especially last couple of weeks.
For sure. And then, Raghunath, I'm curious, in Canada, what are the services or industries who've kind of shown to be the early adopters of AV technology? Where have you seen the biggest growth in adoption?
So where we've seen the early adopters being in the commercial heavy trucking sector, primarily like retailers, trucking companies, any company that has a truck that needs to automate its operations. Based on our experience, we started in 2019. So we had a lot of conversations with multiple stakeholders, including trucking companies, retailers, manufacturers, ports, rail terminals, and with the government. So we realized that including OEMs as well. So the strongest feedback we got in terms of early adopters was from trucking companies or retailers, and the reason why they are the early adopters are because they get to increase their efficiency, improve their sustainability and overall safety, because trucking is known to cause a lot of, a cost of an accident for a truck is significantly higher because it is carrying a heavy amount of load. And on average, it can cost up to $100,000 as a ballpark in terms of a truck coming to an accident. So these are the reasons why we see these companies that when we spoke with them, they were very like companies like Canadian Tire. It's a public thing that we are working with Canadian Tire, and we're working with some other retailers and other clients also, which are of a similar nature. So
And just, sorry, to add to Ravinders, we're seeing it also in the mid-mile market space, in more of the sprinter vans, especially with a lot of the retail sector as well. Public knowledge, Gatic is a member, I guess, just did their first autonomous testing over here in Canada. Big shout out to Gatic. So we're seeing it in that space. And just to add to Ravinder's comment and to Sam's comment, one of the challenges is that in Canada is that the auto policy is, has to be changed in terms of, many of if you're a trucking company that's using this technology, you're still using a, traditional commercial auto policy. If you're a technology company that doesn't have vans, but maybe, may have vans or trucks, you're still using. So we're seeing the need to change that, that strategy in terms of having a policy that can deal with both entities of that nature.
Yep. Can I jump in there? Raghavendra was talking about early adopters, and I agree with everything he was saying, but the real early adopters are the low-hanging fruit. And in Canada, in the Alberta oil sands, for several years now, we've had fully autonomous heavy hauler trucks carrying ore. It's off-road, and therefore it's a much easier deployment scenario and safety case. And also for fully automated farming. There's a company we did some work for called Dot that was purchased by Raven in the US and then moved some facilities back to Canada. So fully automated farming. It's easy. You don't have to worry about kids and other vehicles, but it's a way to test out the technology in a safer way and lessons learned and apply to other situations, which will obviously be on road.
Barry, you just touched on exactly what I wanted to ask next. Sam, look at these early adopters. How can these be helpful in informing future use cases? Kind of what are the lessons learned that we need to take, looking forward to in terms of like scalability and
Sure. And I think Raghavendra, and I got to apologize for, I was trying to say that Wabi's the first long haul level 4 trucking company. I knew you guys around. If I was misunderstanding the business model, I thought you're doing more middle mile and kind of the B2B side. So apologies if that was misunderstood. But no, I think the opportunities in some ways are kind of endless when it comes to especially the trucking ecosystem, right? Our stack is very interoperable across different modes. So again, to go into kind of not to put too much of a Wabi specific lens on, but one of the unique features that we are able to do is during actual kind of stack development, we are able to move both sensor configuration as well as the type of vehicle itself as we are developing the system, right? So we kind of from the outset, our CEO, Raquel Aritzan, was able to kind of pick and choose what mode she really wanted to focus on and chose trucking because we really saw it as a huge, unique need, across the ecosystem, right? As well as one that, avoids a lot of the other technical challenges that, you see in work in urban environments or, anything else that's going to be more crowded, kind of difficult ecosystem. Shout out to people who are trying to conquer that. But I think to Barry's point about, kind of mining operations being actually the one area where systems are actually being deployed right now. And that's truly because of the ease of roads, the lack of pedestrians and other people crossing your paths. And I think that there's also a business case here, right? I mean, I think there have been some legitimate discussions and challenges to what the autonomous kind of passenger moving business model will be. I think, a lot of our friends in that industry will be able to solve that and conquer that. But, you have a very direct need as well as solution in the freight movement industry. You are short on drivers. You are only increasing in terms of goods that need to be moved. You have technology and honestly logistics systems. I come from a very heavy trucking background that are really born out of the 60s and 70s. People still fax in actual reports from their dispatchers to the drivers and vice versa. It is an industry that is ripe for updating, and we see autonomy as a core way to do that all at once.
For sure. Then Redvender, wanted to ask you, by far, the most common question we get at PAVE all the time across all topics is people asking, when will we see AVs? And obviously what we're talking about here is, in a lot of cases, they're already here. These technologies are in some industries being used widely. What is your prediction for when most people in society will have, access to seeing the technology more regularly?
So we have seen, you're right, we have seen a lot of demos by multiple companies, both in Canada, US, and elsewhere in the world. But these are demos. Like there's a huge amount of difference between somebody going out and doing a demo versus actually deploying that at scale. So based on our prediction, the initial current decade is going to be focused on getting the technology ready so that it's ready to be scaled. And towards the end of the decade is where we will actually start seeing some scale. So my prediction is around 2026. Around that time frame is when we will actually see deployments that are realistically getting commercialized and starting to generate revenue. But at that point, it's going to be very minor, like a very extremely minute percentage of the total trucks on the road that will be autonomous. And towards the end of the decade, like approximately 2032 is when we will actually start seeing deployments at scale. I'm talking from a general market trends perspective. And obviously at Newport, we are hoping to be the first ones, and we aim to be the first ones to do that for Class 8 trucks, for the middle mile and some of the other operations. So my prediction is that, and we've already seen some of the existing, because a lot of promises were made back in 2016, 2015, 2012, which was like the hot era for EVs. And now we're seeing, like, I'm sure you've also read in the news that a lot of companies, there's a drop in valuations, investors looking at the AV sector with a very high suspicion. And that is because of a lot of promises were made and stuff was not delivered. So things need to be realistic when we look at it. So my prediction is 2026, 2027, we'll start to see some commercialization.
Super, and helpful. Clinton, they wanted to, okay, we've been talking about the kind of obviously there are a lot of challenges. There are technical challenges, the infrastructure challenges. I want to turn to regulation for a minute. Can you just kind of give an overview of what is the current state of AV regulation in Canada?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So from the regulations in Canada, and I'll speak to Ontario. Ontario does have a framework for AV in terms of regulations. The insurance industry in Canada and basically the IBC, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, does have a framework as well for AV. The challenge is that that framework needs to be, I guess, probably it was developed back in 2016, 17, but things have changed. So that framework needs to be basically more, needs to be more available, or needs to understand a little bit of some of the things that Sam and Ravinder are doing. It's tried to copy a framework in the UK, where the UK market had a framework for AV technology, but that again, it has to consider more of a regional or a perspective of Canada, from that regulation perspective. So there's a lot of things happening. The bottom line is there needs to be change in some of those regulations from an insurance perspective as well.
Yeah, Sam, I wondered if you could just kind of talk a little bit more about what types of changes, especially from the freight and trucking perspective, what kind of regulations would help support cab development and deployment?
Yeah, no, I don't want to get too ahead of it, because I think this mirrors some of the conversations we're having with kind of other stakeholders on the same topics. But in general, look, we are very supportive of both transparent and kind of above the board type regulations, right? We think that there needs to be flexibility for companies to actually test products that are in development, right, that are not fully autonomous yet. That is an important component. But we also fully believe that we need to have certain kind of guardrails and restrictions about how we do that, right? If that means a higher minimum level of insurance that we need to carry, if that means certain training regulations for our safety operators, if that means, other sorts of limitations, that we can work with regulators in order to develop, right, short-term understanding of how we're actually tackling the ODD, the operational design domain, and what we're keeping out of that and what we're putting into that. We're very open to those kind of discussions. But the key part that I think is it can't be forgotten, and we've seen this both in certain areas in the U.S. as well as certain parts of Canada, is that you can't let the unknown be too scary, right? There needs to be a testing and demonstration part of this, both for the actual technical capabilities, but also so that the end users can understand how it can fit in their business model, right? That's I think the core piece that a lot of people have not kind of try to tackle from the outset, and we really see as key. How is this technology not just going to operate safely on the roads? That is a precursor to being able to deploy and actually put it out there, but also what is the business case, right? How are you building that into the technology you're developing? How are you tailoring your technology so that it actually helps the customers that you're going to try to sell it to? We think that is just as important, as everything when you're actually developing the suite of technology, and that relies on some on-road testing and development.
And just to add to Sam's point, that's what the insurance companies and industries is looking for, is those well-run operations, right? How is that going to scale? And obviously that information can be shared with them to make from an insurance perspective. So you hit the nail on the head, Sam.
Yeah. Here, I think you had a
Let me
comment.
jump in. Thank you. When we look at the whole question of regulation, which obviously means government regulation, there's a step before that. And let me say clearly what I'm going to say is my opinion, and I'm not speaking for any of my colleagues here, but Transport Canada has been excellent in stimulating research, development, and testing of automated freight. But the big problem I have is last month, October, the Transport Minister, Omar Al-Gabra, published a report from a task force on the future of supply chain in Canada, with a planning horizon of 30 to 50 years into the future, long range. And in the old report, it spoke about the labor issues, the need to make Canada more efficient, but the report was totally silent on the role of automated freight in driver issues, supply chain efficiency, and so on. And talking about regulations is great, but we have to, I think, get Transport Canada to realize that there's even a role for automated freight in the supply chain. And then once they've done that, then we can get into more detailed regulations.
Thank you. Actually, and Rick, I know you all have done a lot of work on the supply chain, and we've all seen in the last year sort of how disruptions in the supply chain can have really, really tangible impacts on everybody's family. How can this technology help the supply chain, and kind of how can it create a more efficient system?
Yes. So the way AVs can make the supply chain is much more efficient is, so they have advantages like increasing the efficiency. The way AVs can do that is, for example, a truck gets touched by multiple people. It's not just autonomous driving. So multiple people are involved in the truck's overall operations. So when you automate the operations, starting from the point the trucks gets loaded to the point where the driver does an inspection and goes on the road, and then it's autonomously driving or manually driving and then goes on to the other end. The whole leg has multiple places where you can insert efficiencies or take out the bottlenecks, like anything that takes more time. You can improve the efficiency and reduce the bottom line for the clients. So for example, it is well-known fact that the difference between the best and the worst drivers, the way they drive, it can be up to 30%. So in terms of fuel consumption reduction. So if you have an autonomous vehicle driving on the road, then you will save on fuel. That's a direct cost saving. Then you also reduce the green GHG emissions, because trucking is known to be one of the leading contributors for carbon emissions. So using AV technology, you can save on that. In addition to that, you also improve the overall safety. So the accident rates can be drastically dropped, but there's a catch towards that, because with AVs, if you make one accident, and in the same duration, if a manual driver is making 10 accidents, that's not enough, because it's going to get questioned more than the manual driver making the accident. But overall, the point is that safety is also improved, and the other points that I mentioned. So overall, like, yeah, there has to be a direct dollar value reduction for the clients. Only then autonomous vehicles make sense. And at Newport, we are making sure whenever we work with the clients, we build a very deeper relationship with them to understand their current operations, and slowly and gradually deploy autonomy in a very phased manner. So we go through a set of pipeline of tests that need to pass before we go to the next phase. That includes a lot of safety to be done around the tractors and trailers. So yeah, that's how AVs can be more efficient and clients can start saving dollars, and which is why we've been seeing a lot of interest from almost, like pretty high percentage of conversion rate for the clients that we've been speaking with.
Fantastic. Sam, wanted to ask you, again, from the public education perspective, one thing that we hear on the truck side from people is nervousness about you're driving on the highway next to this many ton vehicle. What are things that you think we can say to consumers to help them understand and to build trust and to get them comfortable getting used to sharing the road with autonomous, trucks?
Yeah. No, it's totally fair. And anyone who's driven next to one and maybe inched over to the far corner of their lane can, I think, empathize with it. I think, again, some of it is transparency, right? Like, we actually show, and we are preparing in the next couple of months to release some of the most detailed metrics about how we're actually internally verifying and validating our own safety performance, building out that transparency, right? Helping people understand that we are holding ourselves to a bar that we will, publicly, weigh ourselves against. That for us, kind of safety starts at home, and being there's a lot of spin and shiny pamphlets that have been put out by a variety of kind of AV companies over the last decade or so, and we're really trying to shy away from that, right? We want to be transparent and above the board. This is not a perfect answer, but as someone who's worked in the trucking industry for almost a decade now, it would bear some understanding of how poorly trained and inexperienced a lot of truck drivers kind of currently are, especially in Canada. The US has inched in the same direction as well, but a vast majority of Canadian truck drivers are one truck shop type operations called independent owner operators, and they can really vary in terms of experience and knowledge and safety kind of on the road, right? You can have some very, very experienced 2,000 to 3,000 miler type drivers who are some of the safest people that you will ever meet. But then you can also have people who get their commercial driver's license, are on the road for 6 months, get fed up with it, and then leave. That person who is already fed up with their job in the first 4 months of their job is not someone I would really want to be driving next to. Those are the exact positions that we see autonomy being perfect for, right? It's not just, this is not about replacing humans. This is about building out capacity for fleets that currently, sometimes in spite of having, trying to shuffle in as many drivers as they can, still need to turn away almost half of the loads that they are offered during really tight economic times, right? So, I think it's proving our safety in a transparent way, understanding that the bar for professional truck drivers in this country is not equal. You have some very safe drivers, you have some very unsafe drivers, and we really need to help kind of raise the bar, from the bottom up.
Thanks. Yeah, actually interesting. And then kind of staying on the public education angle, Clinton, you've mentioned insurance a couple times, and that's one issue that I think people are really confused about. How will this technology change what insurance looks like? And insurance has been part of driving for 100 years. How would you respond to that?
I think what insurance is going to look like, you're going to have a policy where obviously it goes back to, at the end of the day, who's responsible, right? So if the technology is responsible for an error, then it's going to be on the technology company. If it's a driver error, then it's going to be on the driver perspective. If it's an OEM error, it's going to be on the OEM, for example. And I know Mercedes was the first OEM to go out publicly to say they will take on the liability in those cases. So that's what insurance is going to look like. And I think in Canada, it is, again, as Sam mentioned, and think it's going to be a lot of learnings, right? In trials of how these technology gets implemented. And that's great for the insurance industry to learn and to understand how they're going to deal with it. So that's where I see what insurance is going to look like in the next couple of years.
Makes a lot of sense. And then Barry, we talk about all these different, insurers and all these different groups. I always like to kind of think of the AV ecosystem as it takes a village. To make a deployment work, you need the public sector and you need the private sector and you need all these pieces working together. Are there groups that we need to bring in more? There are other people that don't yet have a voice in this, or who we really need to be thinking about to make this system work?
Absolutely. There's a lot of I think of what we're doing here really as an ecosystem of ecosystems. You've got, AI, you've got the sensors, you've got people involved in Internet of Things, and many others. And each of these have their own ecosystems. I'm working with a group of people now and exploring whether we can and should move towards an ecosystem of ecosystems to try to bring those together. There's a lot of potential, a lot of education, and I think it's a very exciting area because I think to me, it's a bit like being in 1908 when Henry Ford launched the Model T, the first mass-produced car. And Henry Ford was a wonderful inventor and entrepreneur, but even he could not understand the huge impact the early automobiles would have on every aspect of life in the 20th century. And what we're witnessing now is the launch of Cars 2.0, which is going to involve everybody, impact everybody, and people who are just approaching this have trouble getting their arms around the full scale of this, but it's big. It started slowly, but it's going to be a very exciting century.
Absolutely. We only have 2 minutes left, so I wanted to have one question that I want to ask each of you. AVs bring a ton of potential. They can make, they can obviously improve road safety. They can offer new mobility options. They could improve sustainability, all these different things. What is the potential thing that AVs offer that you are the most excited about? Sam, start with you.
Sure, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer in the safety benefits. Dealt with human truck drivers for a long time. But the thing that really excites me is the efficiencies that it can be gained in our supply chain, right? Nothing has made it more clear what I think a lot of us in the kind of trucking logistics industries saw for a long time, which was how kind of antiquated and unsophisticated our supply chains really were at certain crucial choke points. The ability to increase the length of haul, the ability to run routes more efficiently, to give transparency and optics for actual shippers and trucking companies into where their assets are at any given time. That's a transformational moment that will really increase work for human drivers on the first mile and last mile, increase work for human drivers on regional routes. As long as we are guaranteeing that those other human jobs are going to be good quality jobs, there's no reason that this can't be a win for everyone across the industry.
For sure. It's astounding that it took a pandemic to make us realize kind of what it takes to get paper towel. Right, Bender, what about you? What are you most hopeful about?
So the most exciting thing for AVs to me is like the multiple different stakeholders involved, and for them, the ability for them to collaborate together and overall lead towards cost savings. I'm going to borrow some. I agree totally with what Sam said in terms of having the cost efficiencies and realizing that across multiple stakeholders, and at the end of the day, using technology to make our lives much more easier, more safer. And we are at a point where we have all the missing pieces of the puzzle. We just need to fit them in the right manner. And to do that, we also need to be very honest to ourselves, what is possible, what is not possible. And once that is realized, essentially having a seamless supply chain that can run efficient operations and not using technology, not to complicate things, but to make life much more simpler.
Absolutely. Clinton, what about you?
I would say the most exciting thing is that AVs manage the risks better, right? It's about the information, as Ravinder said. It has so much technology in terms of telematics, in terms of sensors, IoT, and that's the transformation moment for the insurance industry. That's what excites me about the next couple of years in AV.
For sure. Bear, you get the last word.
Okay, thank you. I agree with everybody else. I'll add one additional thought, which is improvements in independence and mobility for people who have physical disabilities, old age, and it can make a huge difference to the quality of life for people who can't get around as much as each of us can.
Absolutely agree with that. Thank you all so much for your insights and thoughts and comments, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. This was our 99th PAVE virtual panel, so it's been exciting to have such a vibrant conversation. Hope to see you all real soon, and thank you again for your time.
Bye-bye.